All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler, who has just enjoyed himself a week off. Martyn, can you tell us and the listeners, what you got up to over that week?
Well, we were in Italy, and it's a beautiful country, as you obviously know. I think you've been there yourself, Jake. We were staying in Sorrento, which is on the Bay of Sorrento, just north of the Amalfi Coast, which is a beautiful part of the world. And we went to see quite a lot of the sites around there, and including the ancient cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, just south of Naples, and they were amazing. If you've never been to those places, you ought to go because they show these incredible cities that were just completely demolished by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. It's quite a shock in a way to see what happened to those places. And what I didn't realize actually was that Pompeii was not discovered. It was completely covered by volcanic ash and lava, and people forgot about it. It's a massive city, but people forgot about it, and it was rediscovered in the 18th century when some guy was digging and came across some artifacts, and then they dug a bit more and discovered what was lying there, and it's been being excavated ever since. So no, amazing place, and Herculaneum similar, not quite so large. Anyway, we're here to talk about rugby league, not about Italy.
It could be a
That's
history podcast.
well, it could be. Yeah, we could switch
Rugby
subjects,
league
but we'd better
history.
not. I don't think we get the same audience.
No, I agree, mate. All right, mate. Well, let's get straight into last weekend's matchups, mate. We'll start with the St Helens defeating Catalans 40 points to nil. What a scoreline.
Well, I think that the two coaches under the most pressure at the moment in Super League are inevitably Paul Wellens and Steve McNamara. Neither of their teams has been pleasing their chairman, I don't think, if I'm honest about it, in this season so far. So it was a crucial game for both of them. And whereas Paul Wellens passed the test, um, it was another very disappointing result for Steve McNamara. And at the moment, St Helens are this win has put them up to fifth in the table, but Catalans are lying eighth in the table, and there has to be some concern about the way that they're performing. Some of their big guns, I mean, there was all that controversy about Luke Keary, um, you know, commenting negatively about the coverage of Super League in England and France, and on the other side, you had young George Whitby, who scored three tries for St Helens, still a teenager, but looks like another fantastic discovery for the Saints. So that certainly has eased the pressure for a while on Paul Wellens, and although having said that, there are quite a few of the names starting to be linked with that job. I mean, I hope that St Helens don't do anything that's too hasty, because we're not halfway through the season yet, are we? We've only played 11 games out of 27. So, it's very easy to, draw a conclusion halfway through a season that you're not playing well enough. But it's only at the end of the season that you actually realize, whether your coach has done a good job for you. So, I'm on Paul Wellens' side, I think, but I know a lot of St Helens fans are not very happy about him.
Absolutely right. And I'm never I'm not a big fan of when a club opts to get rid of a coach mid-season. Like, give them the full
No,
season to try and prove themselves before you look at making any changes. And
I think
yeah,
so. Yeah, if you're gonna make changes, make them at the end of the season. And if you know who your next coach is going to be, have him standing by to take over when the season ends. But at the moment, I think St Helens are quite handily placed in the league. They're as I say, they're in fifth place. They're actually 8 points behind Hull KR, which is, quite a big gap, really, at the head of the table. But nonetheless, there's still a lot to play for, and we'll see how it turns out.
Absolutely. It's a long season, mate. We'll move on to the next matchup. Leeds defeating Hull FC 18 points to 16, and which was a bit of
This,
a thriller.
oh, absolutely was. Yes, absolutely incredible, incredible game with an incredible ending. Ryan Hall, he's got this habit of scoring crucial tries at crucial moments, and he scored the winning try to make it 18-16 on 78 minutes. It was too late for Hull FC to come back. Hull FC had dominated the game, really, if we're honest about it. They were absolutely outstanding. I'll tell you one guy who's had a new lease of life at Hull FC this year, and that's Cade Cust, the standoff half who played for Wigan and then Salford. But he seems to have found his, rightful home at Hull, as far as I'm concerned. Under John Cartwright, the coach, playing extremely well, and I felt really sorry for Cartwright, really, because as I say, I thought Hull, in many respects, were the better team on Friday night, and they just couldn't hold on to to that winning margin in the final few moments of the game. But the funny thing is that Hull last year would have probably lost this game by 50 points, and they wouldn't have been in the game probably. But this year they're totally different. I think Aidan Seas has been probably the crucial signing for them this year. Aidan Seas, vastly experienced, but a tremendous leader of Hull on the pitch. Not the sort of guy who will tolerate, a lack of effort from his teammates. And I think he's done outstandingly well. But they've got some, great young players coming through as well. Young Davy Litton continues to impress. The two young wingers, Harvey Barron and Lewis Martyn, were both outstanding. And they've got quite a well-balanced side this year, and I think that's just doing them a lot of good. And I think they've just fallen out of the top six now. I think they're in seventh place, if I remember rightly. Yes, they are seventh place, just 1 point behind Wakefield and St Helens, but so much better than they were last year. And they took a lot. I think they took about 2,500 fans to Headingley on Friday night. And those fans cheered them all the way. And while they'll have gone home disappointed, obviously not to win the game, they certainly won't have gone home disappointed with the effort that their team made. And that's the incredible contrast between this season and last season.
No, absolutely, mate. They've certainly come a long way, and what a spectacle they got to see over at Leeds.
And Leeds, let's just talk about Leeds. Leeds are in fourth now. So, and Brad Arthur, who's still being linked with the Perth Bears, isn't he? And they've improved just as Hull have this year. And the improvement of teams like Leeds and Hull are what's made this season's competition a lot better than it was last year, I think, in my opinion, Jake.
No, absolutely, mate. No, I agree. And I'm sure Leeds fans will be hoping they'll be able to hang on to Brad Arthur, long term.
Oh,
if
yes.
he doesn't get that Perth Bears gig.
Well, there are some other coaches now being linked with Perth, aren't there? I mean, Brad Arthur has apparently had a formal interview, with the people who are going to be running the Perth Bears, and we've not heard much about how that interview went. But I mean, I can't imagine it would go badly because Brad Arthur is clearly a very experienced and knowledgeable guy. But he's not the only person who's been interviewed. I think Sam Burgess might have been as well, and one or two others too. Even Mal Meninga has suggested that he might throw his hat in the ring for that job. So that's, it's not seemingly as nailed on for Brad Arthur as it looked originally a few weeks ago. But I'd still be very surprised if he didn't get the job, to be honest.
No, absolutely, mate. It'll be a tightly contested coaching search, that's for sure. I'm sure a lot of coaches will have their hands up for it. Um,
Absolutely.
we'll move on to Wigan defeating Leigh 36 points to 28.
Yeah, um, I mean, again, a really good performance by Leigh, and particularly, I mean, Edwin Apapi, I think, is an absolutely great player, and Adrian Lamb made a particular point after the game of praising him, praising his ability, and particularly his defensive ability. And Adrian made the point that opposition players, when they see Edwin Apapi waiting for them, will tend to try and take a detour to avoid him, because he's such a strong defender. He doesn't just tackle, but he tackles very hard and very strong. He's good at putting in what you might call bell ringers, I guess, Jake. And I just think that the thing that disappointed me, though, in a sense, and it's nothing to do with the game itself, but these two teams played this fixture in game one of the season. Why on earth are they playing the same fixture? It's a loop fixture, so they're playing again in week 11 of the season. I can't understand why we've got to have these loop fixtures so early, so that these repeat fixtures so early in the season. This game is one that should have been played much nearer to the end of the season, in my view, because the game in week one attracted more than 21,000 people. This game attracted 17,500, so it lost about 4,000 people. Why is that? Because it was such a thrilling game, and it's partly because people think they've already seen it. They've already seen that game. It was noticeable that there were far fewer Leigh fans at the game than there were for that opening game of the season, which was such a brilliant win for them. But Wigan Wigan were never going to lose this game. I don't think they were. Jay Field, Bevan French. Again, I mean, it's the same old story, isn't it? With them, they're just outstanding, and they were the players that probably did most to get the victory for Wigan, I think.
No, absolutely, mate. It baffles me who makes these fixture lists, mate. And we've had our debates about this in the past, and
Oh,
it's a real head scratcher.
well, I would love to write the fixture list, actually, Jake, because I'm sure I could do a better job than is there at the moment. I mean, that might sound arrogant on my part, but I'm pretty sure I could do. I know there are all sorts of constraints that you have to deal with, with fixture requirements and so on that individual clubs have. But,
Mm,
surely that we can do a bit better than this, in my view,
mm,
anyway.
absolutely, mate. We'll move on to the next matchup. Hull KR defeating Huddersfield, 34 points to nil.
I mean, this was a strange game because Hull KR scored a try through Joe Burgess after 14 minutes, and you thought, well, this is going to be a really one-sided game. But then Huddersfield really, competed with Hull KR for up to about the 60-minute mark. It was still 4-0 after about 60 minutes until Hull KR scored their second try through Mikey Lewis. And then the floodgates opened. They scored four more tries, in the final 20 minutes. And the scoreboard ran away, with itself, really. But Huddersfield had looked a much better side than the scoreboard would sort of suggest in that first 60 minutes or so, and it's sort of strange that they don't seem to put an 80 minutes together. That's the trouble with them. I mean, they had this thing at the start of the season where they were winning games at half time but managing to lose them. Now they were losing by only 4 points at half time, but again, the game ran away with them near the end. I wonder, does it suggest that Huddersfield's fitness is lacking? Hard to say, really. And Hull KR will be happy to have won that game because they didn't play particularly well. If we're really honest about it, they looked a bit sort of deflated after winning the Challenge Cup semi-final the week before. Although there were certain players who played exceptionally well, including Kalepi Tanginoa, who I thought had a really outstanding game for the Robins. But it's probably not a game for most of the Hull KR fans, it's probably not the game that they'll most remember this season. Put it that way.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, it's sort of gone from bad to worse. It almost feels like for Huddersfield this year. They can't catch a
Yeah,
break.
yeah, they just can't. They can't win a trick, unfortunately.
No. Moving on to the next matchup, though, mate. We had Wakefield defeating Warrington 40 points to 10.
Well, not great news for Warrington fans, was it? That
No.
they beat Leigh in the semi-final, which I think was an unexpected victory, but Wakefield absolutely hammered them. And the fascinating thing was that the Wakefield, I mean, Warrington are missing George Williams clearly. They've got Mark Sneed there, and he partnered Stephen Ratchford at halfback. But Wakefield had Max Jowett moved to stand off, allowing Josh Rourke to come in at fullback, and they had Mason Leno at halfback. And Mason Leno effectively ran the show. You know, Mason Leno is one of the most underrated halfbacks actually in Super League. I thought he was underrated when he was in the NRL, by the way, as well. And he just organised the Wakefield team, and they actually ran away with it in front of their ecstatic supporters. I think they had about 6,600 odd people there watching them. And Wakefield are heading for big things. I think if they can beat Warrington by that scoreline, 40 points to 10, they're right on the verge of the top six now. They're actually in the top six in sixth place with 12 points, equal with St Helens. And this weekend they play Salford, so they'll probably keep rising. And it's looking great for them. And Darryl Powell was obviously absolutely delighted and said after the game that there's no limit to what Wakefield can achieve this year. And I mean, they obviously can't win the Challenge Cup because they're not in it. But in terms of winning the Super League title, they're not a bad outside bet, Jake. If you were a betting man, I think Wakefield will probably be about 50 to 1 or something like that. I've not seen the latest odds, but I think whatever their odds are, they look pretty good at that price for a very small bet if that's your thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. They could certainly be a dark horse.
Mm.
But yes, it's good for Darryl Powell to win what we might consider the Darryl Powell Cup between those teams.
Yes, absolutely. It's not just that they're winning, but they're winning really playing some great rugby. That's the good thing. I mean, some teams win, but don't win in an attractive way. But Wakefield are winning, and really pleasing their supporters with the way that they're winning, and that's really so important, isn't it? And as I say, I think they can continue climbing up the table.
Absolutely, mate. We'll move on to the final matchup of the round, mate. Castleford defeating Salford 48 points to 16. The return of Nene McDonald for Salford, great to see.
Yes, and I think he scored a try, didn't he, as well? In the second half. I mean, it was 24-0 at half time, and it was going the way that everybody expected. But Salford did stage a comeback early in the second half and got 10 points with tries by Matty Foster and Nenny McDonald. But then Castleford ran away with it. They brought it back to 24-10, but then Castleford reasserted themselves and the score edged out to 48 points to 16. Tex Hoy, again, another player who's been, I think, quite underrated since he arrived in Super League. I was really surprised when Hull FC let Tex Hoy go last year. They seem to blame him for some of their inadequate displays in 2024, and I certainly don't think Tex Hoy was to blame. I liked him at Hull, and I thought he put in a big effort at Hull, much more so than some of the other players who were there at the time. And he's done well for Castleford, scored a great hat-trick of tries for them in this game against Salford. And Castleford have now been, pushed up to have 6 points, it's highly unlikely that Castleford are going to get up to the top six. Jake, they're probably too far behind. 6 points out of the top six, probably too much for them to make up. But at least they're showing signs of improvement, and that's really great to see. I think for their supporters. Salford, well, they are really struggling, aren't they? And there are so many question marks about what's going to happen to Salford, as this season unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always harder. You see a big scoreline like that. It's probably not a very valuable performance for Cass, unfortunately.
No,
With
but they
the
needed the
scoreline all but
points,
decided.
and
Mm.
yeah, they needed the points, and they were grateful to get them. And hopefully they'll continue to improve as the season continues to develop. And they've got an interesting game. We'll talk about the games this weekend, but they've got an interesting game coming up this weekend, which should draw a big crowd to the jungle.
Absolutely, mate. Well, why don't we touch on some of the things that you wrote about in your column this week, mate? The first one, the strategic review group met with a number of the Super League clubs. Was it
They
last
did a,
week, I
a week
believe?
ago. Yeah, exactly a week ago. And I mean, obviously I was away in Italy at the time, and so I was a bit sort of out of the loop in a sense. But they had a meeting, and since getting back into England, I've tried to speak to people about what happened there, and they had discussions about a number of issues without making any firm decisions about anything. It seems to me, but the point I was making in my column was not that they didn't make any decisions. It's that they need to be open and transparent about what they're actually doing. Because when Nigel Wood, came back into the game, and I've got a lot of respect for Nigel, but he did say that, as opposed to the previous RFL regime, which tended to be very secret, well, it's almost secretive really about what its decisions were and what its strategy was and so on. They needed to be transparent, and they do need to be transparent. They need to tell us what's going on, and if they're going to be having meetings to discuss the various issues that need to be sorted out in our game, they need to tell us what they're doing and what sort of decisions they're making and what sort of issues they're considering, because otherwise we're all just going to be kept in the dark, and people are just going to invent all sorts of conspiracy theories to try and sort of second guess what they might be, what decisions might be coming out of these meetings, and that's just not really going to be satisfactory, is it? In my view.
No, I agree, mate. Transparency is key. And yeah, we like to know as fans, what's sort of been happening in the background for the betterment of the game, don't we?
Absolutely,
Um,
yes, yes. Well, I'm
mm,
still very keen to get Nigel to come onto this podcast, Jake, and he has said that he will do that at some point in the not too distant future. And I think it would be very good for him to do that, because Nigel actually, not everybody's a great fan of Nigel, but he's actually very good at explaining some of the issues, particularly the financial ones that the game faces. And he's by no means is by is a highly intelligent individual, and I think he would be able to um, win a few people over to his way of thinking if he was prepared to come on to here and do that. And I hope he does. And the invitation the invitation is it stands, doesn't it? Let's say.
absolutely, he's always welcome. Much the same as that invite goes out to anyone in our sport who's of interest, mate. They're always welcome on the podcast.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um, yeah, but the other thing you wrote about, mate, Eamon McManus, he's come out throwing his full support behind the French clubs, which is a good sign for those who. I
Absolutely,
think
yeah.
everyone wants them to remain in the Super League, don't they?
I mean, there are people in the British game who wonder what the point is of having French clubs in the Super League and so on. I think that's a very blinkered viewpoint, personally, Jake. But the truth is that we've got what's effectively an international competition, and we've not been able to take advantage of it as perhaps we should have been able to. Because we're such a badly resourced sport, we've not been able to sort out TV deals in France, for example, as we should have been able to do. And we've not been able to sell the idea of a sport that extends into, France and so on, in the way that we should have been able to do as well. We've not. I don't think we've got the respect of the British sporting public in a way that we ought to have, given what we've achieved in our sport. And I was thinking that the other day because, last week or so there was there's an annual sort of celebration night in London where various awards are given to people connected with sport for all sorts of different things, mainly connected with marketing issues and so on and so forth. And once again, rugby league doesn't get a mention. We're not even shortlisted for anything. Never mind winning any awards for some of the things that we achieve in our game. It's almost as though to these people who are in London, it's almost as though we don't exist really, Jake, and that's it would be easy to blame them, wouldn't it, for ignoring us? But the fact is, we've got to make the effort to draw rugby league to the attention of a wider public, and if we just completely, if we were to throw the French clubs out of the competition and focus purely on the M62 clubs, that would be just admitting defeat, in my view, and it wouldn't be worthy of a sport that's as great as our sport is. So, Eamon McManus, I think, recognises that. He wrote about the issue very well in the St Helens match programme last Friday night, and I more or less replicated, what he said in my column, because as I said in the column, I couldn't really have put it any better than he did. And I just hope that Ray Eamon isn't the only person who thinks in that way, and I don't think he is. But you never know, do you? There are some people who take a quite opposite view.
No, absolutely. It's good to have a powerful voice like him in support of it, I think.
Of course.
And yeah, I'm sure there are others out there. So we'll see what happens in the years going forward. The other thing you wrote about in your column, mate, was the Warrington Wembley dilemma. Will fans walk out for Wembley?
Well, they've had to fork out to go to Las Vegas this year, which is, I mean, Las Vegas is a shock, isn't it? Because not only is it expensive to get there, but it's expensive once you do get there. Everything in Las Vegas costs a fortune. So they'll have had to shell out a lot of money in making that trip, those who went there. Then, of course, they had the magic weekend at Newcastle, which was another significant outlay for them. And then, so coming up shortly after that, they're now in the Challenge Cup final at Wembley, playing against Hull KR. I'm quite sure that Hull KR will take a 5-figure crowd to Wembley. They've got fantastic support at the moment. I mean, they flooded the York ground for their semi-final. But I hope that we get a good turnout of Warrington fans. Warrington fans have had, over the years, a lot of disappointments, really. Warrington are a big club, but they're a big club that ought to be winning more trophies than they do. They got to the Challenge Cup final last year and gave a very disappointing performance going down against Wigan. And I just wonder how many of their fans will go to Wembley again this year, fearing that they might be in for another performance like that one. So I hope I'm completely wrong. And I hope I'd love nothing more than to hear Warrington fans reacting to this podcast and saying that idiot doesn't know what he's talking about. We're going to get 20,000 fans to Wembley this year, and we're going to shout them home. And nothing would please me more than seeing a massive contingent of Warrington fans going to Wembley. It's just that I have some doubts about how many of them will actually make the trip.
Yeah, it's certainly been an expensive year for them. And while we're on the topic of big events, the Vegas teams have been announced, mate. Probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to us that Hull KR and Leeds are going over to Vegas next year. What's your reaction to them being picked?
Well, I'm pretty happy. Hull KR and Leeds will take quite a lot of fans with them, I think. I mean, the NRL are hoping to break through the 50,000 barrier at Allegiant Stadium next year, and that should be perfectly possible to do, because it's not just Hull KR and Leeds, is it? You've got the Bulldogs will be playing the Dragons, won't they, in the NRL games, and I think the Cowboys will be playing the Warriors. Is it?
The Knights, I think.
The Knights? Sorry, yeah, the Cowboys will be playing the Knights. So hopefully, the fans from all those clubs will, go in big numbers to get to Las Vegas and to fill the stadium out. And so I'm happy with Leeds and Hull KR. St Helens were the other major contenders, but I think they'll probably go next year alongside probably Hull FC, I would think, to be honest, Jake. So, I think that works out reasonably well. And I think, we can look forward to a great event in Vegas next year. I might even go myself, mate, if I get the chance.
Oh, mate, it'd be nice. First class would be perfect, but hey, I'll take economy if there's a spare ticket.
Yeah.
Moving on to some other news, mate. Salford City Council, they've pulled out of stadium talks with Salford's new owners. Do you know any details on this one, Martyn?
Well, they clearly don't trust the people who currently own Salford Red Devils. I think that's fair to say. They've not been able to complete their due diligence on them. And I think that throws the future of Salford Red Devils into enormous uncertainty, because I can't imagine that the people who now own the club, who have put very little money, if any, into it, will now feel that they will feel obliged to put any more money into it. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping to find out a bit more about that as the week goes on. Paul King, the former chief executive, is now back involved with the club, and he's really got the club at heart. He's an amazing guy in terms of his love for the club and his determination to keep it going. But I just wonder whether he'll be able to do that. And until I try to speak to Paul and find out, some of the detail behind the story, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But I always thought it looked a very sort of strange deal, if I'm really honest about it, Jake. This idea that they were going to buy the stadium and the land around it, and as I say, now it looks as though that deal is completely shut off.
It's going to make a great tell-all book one day if Paul King ever decides to sit down and write one.
Yes.
Which
there's no doubt about it. Yeah. But of course, we did have some interest from the Sydney Roosters in buying Salford, didn't we? If the NRL moves into into the British game, and I think our advice on a previous podcast was, not to change the name of the club to the Manchester Roosters, which was the favoured option, wasn't it?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, don't go changing that name. Now, in other news, mate, I saw there was a bit of talk over the last week or so about proposed dates for the World Club Challenge, where it's going to fit into the schedule. The date for next year, they're sort of floating around the date, the 21st of February, which should be...
Yes, that will be the Saturday before the Vegas weekend.
Still cutting it a bit tight.
It's certainly tight, and I'd have thought it was better to make it 2 weeks before the Vegas event.
Mm.
just for logistics purposes, really. So I don't know if that's. I'm not sure whether that's been um, put firmly into the calendar yet, or whether it's just a suggested date. But I'd certainly think, because there's a very good chance that Hull KR or even Leeds might win the Super League title this year, and if they do, to play that World Club Challenge only a week before they play in Las Vegas would leave things so incredibly tight. It would be ridiculous.
Mm.
So let's hope that it's that date isn't set in stone.
Mm. And then on the NRL side of things, you've got the Bulldogs who currently sit at top of the ladder. They're going to
Absolutely.
Vegas.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we've still sort of, some people have still suggested that Vegas should be the venue for the World Club Challenge, but I suppose, maybe if Hull KR win Super League and the Bulldogs win the NRL, could we swap the fixtures round and let the Bulldogs play Hull KR in Vegas and Leeds could play the Dragons? That, of course, would completely ruin the NRL competition, wouldn't it? Because
Yeah.
those games are supposed to count as the opening weekend of the NRL competition, so it
Yeah.
wouldn't work, obviously. But it would be it's a nice thought potentially.
It's a tricky one to navigate. But yeah, we'll wait and see what happens there. I think there was some discussion around the World Club Challenge in 2026, potentially them playing that after the season ends, but before the World Cup starts. So
Well, that would be a better
I'd be.
option, in my view, because you'd have the same teams. The trouble with playing the World Club Challenge, as we do at the start of the following season, is that the teams have radically changed quite frequently from
Mhm.
what they were when they won their respective grand finals. And it would certainly make a lot of sense to play the World Club Challenge sooner after the respective grand finals. Whether that will happen or not,
Mm.
who knows? It's you know that's the obvious solutions, but that's the obvious solution, Jake. But in rugby league, we very rarely do we adopt the easy solution. We always try and make things harder for ourselves.
Mm. No, absolutely, mate. No, so we'll sit tight and we'll watch that one. See
Mm.
what happens there. Now, James Graham, he had some comments in his latest podcast, Martyn, talking about the new Perth team and how they might look at poaching some big name players from the Super League. He's suggested maybe they go and get a big three from Wigan in French, Harry Smith and Junior and Semba,
Hmm.
and then trying to market Perth as England's team almost with all the expats that live there. Obviously, we don't want to see those players leaving the Super League, but do you think that would be a good marketing approach for Perth to try and market it as the England team of the NRL?
Not, no, not really. Perth is an Australian team, or will be an Australian team, and I think it would be silly, silly to market it as anything else. I mean, they might get some English players, obviously, and I can certainly. I've said before that there's a great attraction. I mean, Perth is a beautiful city, and I can say that from experience, and it's a place that if I were a rugby league player, I certainly wouldn't mind living in. So
Mm,
but it's got to be a city that identifies with Perth and with Australia and with Australian sporting culture. And I think the problem for them is that they're facing a hostile media environment in Perth, as we've seen already with the
mm,
reaction of the West Australian newspaper to the announcement of the new team. And if they were to sort of pursue this idea of it being England's team in the NRL, I think that would go down like a lead balloon with a lot of people in Western Australia. So no, I'd discourage that point of view. I'm afraid.
mm,
Even I mean, I'm loath to disagree with James Graham, but
mm,
nonetheless, I don't. I think and I didn't see that podcast, so maybe he was talking tongue in cheek. I'm not so sure, but
mm.
I don't think I'd go down that route.
Yeah. Now, in other NRL slash international related news. Max King's been selected for New South Wales after sort of pledging his allegiance to England, or putting his hand up to play for England. What do you make of this, mate? Do you think it's sad to see him, I guess, being realigned back with Australia?
Well, not really. I mean, he's an Aussie. I mean, although oddly enough, he
Yeah,
was born in England, wasn't he? So he
yeah,
actually, he's got more of a claim to play for England than some other players have. KL Iro, by the way, the young player, I think plays for Canberra. Does he? Iro. He was born in England too. When his father
Sharks, I think.
it's Sharks. That's right.
Yeah.
When his father Kevin was playing here, he was born in at that time. So there are players who have got quite legitimate claims to play for England, but I think Max King, quite frankly, will now have his eyes on playing for Australia. Now that
Mm,
he's got into the New South Wales squad for the first State of Origin game, I think it's Australia probably all the way for him now. So
mm,
that's just that. That's the modern world we live in. Players do um, manage to qualify for more than one nation, sometimes several nations, actually.
mm, absolutely. The other one's AJ Brimson. He's put his hand up for England selection if Shaun Wane will have him. Do you think
Well,
he'd
he's a
make the
very
cut,
good
mate?
player. He's and we are short of full backs. I was looking at our full backs in Super League the other day, and we've got Jack Wellesby at St Helens. We've got Max Jowett at Wakefield, but it's amazing how many of the other full backs that currently play in Super League are Australian players. And you can go through. I won't, from sort of Wigan. Wigan have got Jay Field, for example. Even at the lower level, you've got Castleford with Tex Hoy, you've got Hull with Jordan Rappener, and so on. So
Mm,
it's we've not got a lot of players to pick from at full back. I mean, Jack Broadbent at Hull KR, he's moved into the full back role with some degree of success as well. But AJ Brimson, I think, is a really outstanding player. I love watching the Gold Coast, and partly because I enjoy watching players like him. So who knows? Obviously, at this moment, we don't know whether um, he will be in the squad, and we don't know what Shaun Wane's thoughts are, do we? As yet.
No, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Any other points you want to touch on before we get into this weekend's matchups,
Well,
Martin?
let's just congratulate the two teams that are going to be at Wembley for the 1895 Cup final,
Oh, yeah.
York and Featherstone. Featherstone had a very convincing win at Oldham in the semi-final, and poor old Oldham. Oldham in the old days were a really great rugby league team, but they never managed to get to Wembley. There was, some of their fans used to think there was some sort of a curse, that maybe a curse that that had been put on the club by somebody, that meant that they would never play at Wembley. And they thought with the 1895 Cup this year they were in with a great chance of breaking that hoodoo. But very sadly, it wasn't to be, unfortunately, and Featherstone upset the apple cart for them. It was a convincing win, 40 points to 14, and in the other game, York Knights held off Bradford Bulls. So it's going to be York and Featherstone, who have both been to Wembley quite recently, both of them in the 1895 Cup final. So I think a lot of people were hoping for an Oldham v Bradford final, because I think both those teams would have taken an awful lot of supporters to Wembley, but it wasn't to be. But it's York and Featherstone, and good luck to both clubs. I'm sure they'll have a great day out in the sun at Wembley.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a match that'll be.
Mm.
Be exciting to see. All right, mate, let's get into this weekend's matchups. On Thursday night, we have Leigh taking on Hull FC. Who do you have in this
Oh,
one?
I would really look forward to this game because Hull have shown so much improvement this year. and Leigh is such a formidable side. Leigh are still in third place in the table. Hull have just dropped down to seventh now, but they'll be desperate to, get back to winning, having lost several games in a row now, albeit quite narrowly. Could there be a shock here? Could Hull really upset the apple cart for Leigh? I doubt it. I think Leigh might win by about 10 points, but I think Hull will, Hull are a transformed side this year, and you've got a really interesting situation where you've got John Asiata going back to Leigh. Be interesting to see how the Leigh fans used to worship him, but how will they greet him when he returns? Zach Hardacre, of course, he's also at Hull now, but was previously at Leigh. So there'll be some interesting crowd reactions, I think, to some of the Hull players when they take the field, and it would be a great time for those players to really show what they're capable of, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure they'll get a warm reception, mate. But yeah, we'll
Warm
wait
in
and
one way
see.
or another. Yeah, yeah.
And then the next matchup, we have Huddersfield taking on St Helens.
Well, St Helens got that great win against Catalans, and I'm pretty sure they'll continue in that vein, and I think they'll beat Huddersfield comfortably. This young man, George Whitby, playing at halfback, is looking really such a talented young player, and he's going to be playing directly opposite Adam Clune, who's the really experienced Huddersfield halfback. So it will be a fascinating contest between an old master and a young master, and there's a lot. I think there's quite a lot to look forward to in that game.
Absolutely. He's playing wise and well beyond his years as Whitby, so
Oh gosh, yeah,
such an exciting prospect.
yeah.
Another matchup we have on Friday is Warrington taking on Hull KR.
Oh, Challenge Cup preview. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm.
this is a game that Warrington really have to win. They're back in ninth place now. They've got 10 points from 11 games, so they've won five and lost six. And this isn't how it's supposed to be working out for them. Sam Burgess, his coaching career, in a sense, is on the line because they've not been losing. They lost badly at Wakefield at the weekend, and I think that was perhaps a reaction to winning the cup semi-final. But if there was ever one game that they could win that would restore confidence, the confidence of their supporters, beating Hull KR in this game would be a massive one. And it would. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about how many Warrington fans will make the trip to Wembley? Well, if Warrington can beat Hull KR this Friday night, that would be a massive boost to their prospects of getting more people to follow them to Wembley. And I think they might just do it. I think they might just sneak a win here by a very small margin, perhaps 4 points or thereabouts.
No, I absolutely agree with a lot of the points you made there, mate. It'd be great marketing for Wembley if Warrington could win.
It would.
But we'll move on to the next matchup. It is Castleford taking on Leeds. Quite an
Well,
interesting one.
if Warrington v Hull KR is a big game for Warrington, Castleford v Leeds is an equally big game for Castleford. Castleford
Mhm.
always do well at home against Leeds. There's something about Leeds visiting Castleford that makes Castleford players grow an extra leg. They always seem to do well against Leeds, or nearly always. I'm sure somebody might find some occasions when they didn't, but they. I still remember that game in 2017 in March when they beat Leeds 66-10, and I still say that was the best performance ever in Super League by any team I've ever seen. That was when Castleford had a great year under Darryl Powell. I don't think they'll do that again, of course, but I think
Mm.
they might sneak a win here. That I don't. I might be a complete idiot for saying this, but I think Castleford might just hang on to win by something like 4 points, and just sort of just put a bit of a spoke in that Leeds, those Leeds performances of late.
Yeah, just a gut feeling, mate.
It is a gut
Who
feeling, and
knows?
as I say, gut feelings. I don't normally recommend that people act on gut feelings, but I just think
Mm,
this week it's just they had the win against Salford. It might have just given them a bit more confidence, and they might be able to carry that forward into this game.
yeah, and let's hope. I guess for your prediction, history repeats itself. They might, come out and have a blinder.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, moving on to the other matchup on Saturday, we have Catalans taking on Wigan.
Well, again, these are vital home games, aren't they? So this is the third game where we could say quite justifiably that it's so important for the home side. Catalans
Mm,
desperately need a big game at home. Will they get it against Wigan? I'm not sure.
mm,
But if they get hammered by Wigan, as is a possibility, unfortunately, that could put real pressure on Steve McNamara. So I hope that Catalans play well, but I think Wigan will be too strong for them and will probably win by about 10 points.
yeah, and then moving on to the final matchup of the round on Sunday, we have Wakefield versus Salford.
Versus Salford. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
this should be an easy win for Wakefield, shouldn't it? On the recent evidence of their performances, I think we're probably looking at least a 30-point win. We're never quite sure what sort of team Salford will put out, but I just can't see Wakefield losing this one, and they'll just keep rising up the table. That's it's a great prospect for Wakefield fans. Not so
Mm.
much Salford, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, hang in there, Salford fans. We keep saying it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's all we can really say. Hang in there. Hopefully, we'll
Absolutely,
get
yeah, yeah,
better.
yeah. They're faithful fans, and they're great people, and they give great support. But
Mm.
unfortunately, the team just can't deliver at the moment.
No, that's right. All right, mate. Anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here
Yes,
today?
just one final thing, mate. Just one final thing. Tomorrow, I'm heading down to London to the Australian High Commission for this, revelation about what's going to happen to the London Broncos. And it was originally going to be. Um, this media conference was originally going to be held last month while you were still in England, and
Mm.
I'd been hoping you might be able to make it down there, but clearly now you're back in Australia. But I'll be at
Yeah,
your High Commission tomorrow, Jake, and
yeah,
so I'll give your High Commissioner your best wishes
yeah,
if I
yeah,
meet.
yeah. Yeah, say good day to him.
Yeah, yeah, but I think we're going
Bummed
to
I couldn't
find that
make it.
Gary Hetherington, obviously he's going to become the chief executive at London Broncos at the end of the year, and I think we'll find that he's got some money coming in from Australia to help prop up the Broncos, and they need it because they are next to the bottom of the league in the Championship now. So they need some help from somewhere, and hopefully they're going to get it. And Rugby League in London, hopefully, it's the first step on its restoration, and let's hope so.
Mm. No, absolutely, mate. Well, we'll have all those details for our listeners, obviously in League Express this week, and obviously we'll discuss it on the podcast next week as well,
Yeah,
mate. So
yeah,
hope it all goes well.
yeah. And I'm sorry that you've been getting so much rain in Australia, mate.
Oh, mate.
You left Manchester to go back to the Sunshine Coast, and it's rained ever since.
Yep.
You made a bad move, I'm afraid, Jake. And
Oh,
over
mate.
here in England, we're not getting any rain at all.
I
So
can't believe it.
you've played a very bad card, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Mate, I can't believe it either. I don't think, in the last, not that I've been in Australia the last few years, but I haven't seen it rain this much in God knows how long. Since I was
No.
in Manchester. um, but yeah, mate, at least I'm used to it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. At least the rain's probably warmer where you are now, though.
Yeah, that's it. And it's sort of stopped me from going to the beach, unfortunately. So I'm hoping for some sunny weather so I can go for a nice walk along the coast.
Yeah, yeah. Don't go
Who
in the
knows,
sea
maybe
though. There's
next
too
week.
many horrible creatures in the sea
Um,
where you live, mate.
but
But
yeah, anyway,
a bit
uh,
dangerous to tangle with.
Oh, mate, yes. I've got to stay away from sharks, stay away from spiders.
And
That'll be
stay
my
away
goal.
from box jellyfish, whatever they're called.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. All right, mate. We might wrap things up here and do it again next week, eh?
Great stuff, mate. Great to see you
All
again,
right.
Jake, and thanks a lot.
You too, mate. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.